you've been feeling the call to write a book, it is no accident. Your book is needed in the world, so let's make it happen. I'm Nicola Humber, and this is the Unbound Writers Club. Hello, magical soul, and welcome to the Unbound Writers Club. Today, I am joined by a very special guest, Michelle Minnikin, who is author of Good Girl Deprogramming, a guide to unleashing the rebel within, which sounds really like, raw, let's do it. And it is totally that kind of book. And also, what Michelle does in the book is shine a light on the really quite sinister tactics and tricks of coercive control that not only program us to be good girls, but keep us in that mindset for years, decades, and generations that follow. So, like, this is a really powerful, deep book. And the reason, it came out in November, 2023, last year, as I'm recording this. But Michelle has just released the audio version of Good Girl Deprogramming. So I wanted to talk to her about this. You know, we talk about that good girl mindset and how that can show up in the book writing process and also in the audio book recording process. There's a very strong focus on perfectionism. I know many of us struggle with that. So I think you're going to find this a really interesting, helpful, supportive conversation. So let's get to it. So, Michelle, welcome back to the Unbound Writers Club.
Thank you ever so much for having me back.
Of course. I knew that we would have you back. But we are here because you have recently released the audio version of Good Girl Deprogramming. So we're going to dive into that. But first, I want to ask you, what makes you an unbound writer?
So that's a brilliant question. And it's the same sort of premise as Good Girl Deprogramming, isn't it? It's that free and being in control of your own destiny as well. So that's why I was so attracted to the Unbound Press as a publisher, and I always call it like the midwives to get my book into the world. And it's that freedom and that being able to talk from my soul,
and
not being constrained.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that talking from your soul, and I guess with an audio version, like, you literally get to do that. What made you, did you always know you were going to record an audio version of this book?
Yes, I think it's really important. So my community of ADHDers, we consume way more audiobooks than actual books. So it needed to be accessible to us. And I had so much feedback about people reading my book and knowing me and reading it in my voice. So I was like, well, I have to give the customers what they want, really. And so yes, it took much longer than I expected it to.
Yeah,
but I got it done.
Yeah. What was the process like? Because it is very different, from writing the book to actually speak the words out loud. And I've got Good Girl Deprogramming on my desk. It's quite a chunky book. That's quite a lot to read. How was it for you?
Yes, it's like 84,000 words, so it's like 9 hours long. But yes, I was like, I could just book out a couple of days and get this done. But I found that each chapter took like almost a day's worth of energy to read, and I needed rest time in between. So it took about 2 months in total, and I just recorded it in the most just using my Blue Yeti mic in my living room because it's the most soundproof room in the house, and I almost had to make sure everybody else was out of the house as well, so there was a lot of logistics involved, and just sat and recorded it. And my audiobook editor made it really easy for me because I made mistakes all over the place, because I used loads of big words. I know how to write and I know what they mean, but I can't say them.
I love that.
So there was he gave me some really lovely advice. It's just like, when you make a mistake, pause, clap, and then just start the sentence again.
Oh, I like that. That's really
so
good.
He just was able to chop out the mistakes rather than me having it all to be perfect. So it was kind of, he made it perfect, or as nigh on perfect as possible. But that was such a beautiful process because, you know, James was upstairs once listening to me. It sounded like I was like literally slapping people when I was recording it.
I mean, I quite like that advice for, you know, for when we're writing as well. If you feel you've made a mistake, just pause, clap, and move on. It like shifts the state, you know, shifts your state, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so I found it really, really useful. But I learned really quickly that trying to get a whole chapter in one take was too much. Because I'm like, one of the things about talking for so long is you get really thirsty.
Yeah.
So I just had to do like half the chapters and at the end. But yeah, so I tried to do like one chapter like once a week. Got to the point. But yes, and then he made it pretty for me.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, did you connect with the words in a different way when you were speaking them out loud?
You know, that inner critic.
Yeah.
And I could so tell when Michelle was being Michelle and then when Michelle was being a psychologist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was like, oh, there she goes with the big words again. But yes, and it was like, oh, that helps. And lots of it was like, oh, this is really good. I was like, you know, you spend so much time in it
Yeah.
that it's like a really interesting helicopter view. So your sort of internal monologue when you're reading the words and like, oh, that's really good. Or and then there's the inner critics like, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't have said it that way, but oh well, it's out in the world now. So you just have to love it, bless it, let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. I always recommend, actually, I was having a conversation with Natalie Farrell, who's one of the other Unbound Press authors, the other day, and I was talking about like when we're in the writing process, actually, if we speak the words out loud, we can really like clock whether like, am I speaking in my true voice, or, you know, is there something a little bit off here?
Training.
Exactly.
Psychologist indoctrination.
Totally, totally. I mean, were there any chapters or sections that you found more challenging to read, to speak out loud?
It's always that same chapter about strategic exhaustion, all the ways that women are kept tired. I find that such a heavy, weighty chapter because that's where my good girl conditioning still, you know, still battling in, you know, all of those ways that we should be young, pretty, thin, and also do all of the things, all of the domestic labor, the housework, the looking after children, you know, caring for friends, relatives, random strangers. It's all of that heaviness, and I still have that.
Yeah.
So that reading that out was like was tough, I think.
Yeah. 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 How did you manage that then? How did you kind of support yourself during the process?
It was a mixture of, there was a bit of relishing in it and celebration because, you know, writing a book is a huge deal.
Yeah, totally.
And almost relishing the fact that I had this, you know, these ideas out in the world. So I try to look after myself as much as possible, but I also was really impatient to get the bloody thing finished as well at the end.
Yeah.
So yeah, I still have that perfectionism thing, but I think the way that we recorded it was useful. I think if I was in a booth with people around me watching me talk, that would have been like the end of the world. I couldn't have done it. So being in my own space and, you know, being in control of all of that and having somebody that can make my sort of like bit of a pig's ear of things into something good.
Exactly. Yeah, having that kind of support is really important, isn't it? Like, you know, knowing you don't have to do it all yourself. Like there's somebody else who can help you with that.
Yes. Yes. And the funny thing is as well, it's like I had to get James listen to the book. I couldn't listen to myself back. So it was like, can you just make sure all of the random not supposed to be there swear words and clappings has been removed from this podcast, from this audio book?
Someone's listening, they're like, who is this woman? She's just clapping all the way through it.
Yeah, I should find some of the outtakes because that'd be quite funny. Content advisory notice.
Exactly. That's interesting. Well, I say that's interesting, but I totally get that piece about not wanting to listen back to it yourself. I mean, I very rarely listen back to anything that I do. I mean, what was that about for you?
It's 9 hours for a start.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's true.
It's like 9 hours, and I think there's so much useful and interesting content out there. I couldn't prioritize listening to me over all the other
Yeah.
things I got to learn.
I totally get that. Why
I was
would
like, so I
I've
said,
just spoken this, so why
yeah,
would I listen back to
yeah, it's
it?
like I wrote it, I've spoken it. The editing process, you read it a lot. It's like almost a case of I'm like bored with this now. Can I just do something
Yeah,
else?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So one of the questions I like to ask are about any like fears, any particular like fears, doubts that came up like during the writing process. I wonder if there's kind of anything different that came up for you during this process of recording the audiobook, or were they of a similar flavor?
It was similar about being perfectionist. So some of the bits I have listened to, I do stumble over words sometimes because my brain works faster than my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, can we make that perfect? And it's like, it doesn't need to be perfect. You understand what the word is I'm saying. And it was the same as like, I had this almost like it was life or death if there was any spelling mistakes in the book. It was like
Yeah.
literally, my GCSE English teacher had like lives inside my brain for free. But yeah, it was almost that like what happens if it's not perfect? And then the other one is obviously what happens if people hate it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about that because something interesting, nice lead in there,
Yeah,
because something
no.
that's happened quite recently. I mean, the book, I can't believe it's coming up. It won't be long until it's been out for a year. Like that just
Yes.
blows my mind. And you've recently had or experienced a bit of a rite of passage when it comes to being an author, and received your first 1-star review on Amazon, which I know a lot of people are just terrified of, that somebody is going to criticize their book or leave a negative review. What was that like for you?
So I don't know why I was even in there, but I just noticed that there was this 1-star review, and it's quite short. It just talks about my horrendous writing and how she or he or they couldn't actually get through it because it was awful. And my first reaction was to laugh because it was so ridiculous.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
but and you kind of go through that sort of like, is it true? Is there any
Mhm.
evidence of this? Um, is there anything to learn from this? So you kind of quickly go through those questions. And I write a whole like section of the book about, unhooking from feedback,
Yeah.
because external validation does not prove your worth. You need to be okay with you before, go out to anyone else. So I have done so much work on criticism and perceived criticism in my life, finding out that I've got ADHD and the associated rejection sensitivity around that as well.
Mm,
And, lifelong people pleasing. And
yeah.
so if somebody thinks I'm rubbish, then that would have 10 years ago devastated me.
Hmm.
But I'd done the work in the writing of the book. It was as good a book as I could possibly make it. And you and your team helped with that. And, I was so proud of getting it
Hmm.
out. And I've had so much wonderful feedback. Everybody, there's been the odd slight niggle, which happens, but most people, if they're attracted to your work, will pick it up and love it.
Totally.
So I thought, well, we'll make some really good content about this because I know everybody's terrified of being criticized. So I did a post on LinkedIn which went really well. But it's all about, feedback tells you more about the preferences of the person giving the feedback than actual objective evidence about you.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Yeah. I always think when something like that happens to me, yeah, obviously you feel it and you go through like those range of emotions. But something that pretty much always comes up for me is like, oh, this is gonna make some really good content that I can
Me
write
too.
about and share about. Like, thank you very much.
Yeah, and it's harsh. And we sit and we watch women being teared down on the internet every day. And I talk about that in my book as well, about how they've got us scared with the whole witch wound thing, fear of being visible, fear of the tall poppy syndrome, all of that stuff. And this is not that. This is somebody who clearly didn't read the first 20 pages that you can do for free on Amazon to decide whether this book would be something that was going to be good for them.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah, it's quite extreme to leave a 1-star review, to be honest.
Yes. Well, the funny thing is as well, I've got like people like, I'm going to write some reviews. I'm like, yes, exactly, this is exactly what I need, thank you very much.
Totally. And
I sold some books.
Exactly. It can actually, when something like this happens and you are courageous enough to share about it, because it is edgy to share about it, can actually kind of inject a lot of kind of fresh energy into the book and bring new people to the book. So it can be like a really powerful thing. So thank you to that person.
Thank you.
Whoever you are.
Yes, much love.
And note to everyone listening, I'm really bad at this myself, but if you've loved a book, do go and leave a positive review for the author, because it makes a real difference.
It does. I'm starting to get the reviews on Audible now, which is really lovely too. So
I love that. So if someone's listening to this, and in particular, if they share that fear of, but will my book be perfect enough? What if people criticize me? What piece of advice would you give to them?
Well, the best advice I ever got was go and find your favorite book on Amazon, your most favorite book that you love and you would defend to the ends of the earth. Go and find that and then go and read the 1-star reviews.
I love
that. Because it's like you almost need to inoculate yourself against that. And it's like something that you absolutely love and live by, other people won't like it. And that's the beauty of the world. Like, not everybody likes the same things, and that is okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is absolutely okay.
Yeah. Actually, like I feel like it's the sign of a powerful book if you've got at least 1-star review, because you've evoked some strong feelings. So yeah, that's a really powerful thing. I love that piece of advice.
Yes,
Michelle, I always love speaking with you, and I'm sure we'll get to have another conversation as well. But for now, what's the best way for people to connect with you? And also, what platform can they access the audio version of Good Girl Deprogramming on?
So the audio version is on Audible.
Mm-hmm.
You get more money if you keep it exclusive. So I thought, well, let's do that. And I spend most days every day on LinkedIn. So that's kind of where I am. But I'm on all the other bits and all the other platforms as well. Okay. And I'm blessed with the fact that there's only 3 of us in the world with my name as well. So fairly discoverable.
Is that true? 3 people in the world
that I found.
That's brilliant.
2 of us are in Newcastle, which is even bonkers. But yeah.
Oh, fantastic. We'll make sure we put all the links in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for being in the Unbound Writers Club today. I'm so grateful for you and the work that you're doing in the world, and long may it continue.
Awesome. Thank you.